The once vibrant world of Ofa 7 now lay in ruins. Smoke rose from broken buildings, and the distant echoes of falling debris only reminded the survivors of the endless war. The Kirith Empire, a race of alien conquerors, had arrived and shattered everything in their path. They were advanced, powerful, and merciless. Over the years, the humans of Ofa 7 had fought back, but it had been hopeless. One by one, the human colonies fell. Now only a few scattered survivors remained, hiding in the shadows, doing everything they could to stay alive. Among them was Elias Vance, a man who once led the rebellion against the Kirith Empire. He was a warrior, hardened by years of fighting, but nothing could prepare him for the quiet loneliness of the world after the war. His wife, Sarah, had died in the final battle that sealed the fate of humanity on Ofa 7. The thought of her still haunted him. The loss of her was a wound that never healed, a scar that would always remain. Now, Elias lived in the deep woods on the outskirts of what had once been a bustling human city. His only company was his young daughter, Kala, the last living connection to his wife. She was only 6 years old, but she had already seen more destruction and death than most adults. Yet despite it all, there was something about her that reminded Elias of Sarah. The way she carried herself, the way she looked at him with those bright eyes that seemed to hold so many unspoken thoughts. Her eyes were exactly like Sarah's, and it was both comforting and painful at the same time. It was late in the evening when the storm clouds gathered over the horizon, casting a dark shadow over the forest. Elias sat by the fire, his back against a large fallen log. The warmth of the flames did little to calm the heavy ache in his heart. Kala was beside him, her small hands clutching a ragged doll she had found in the ruins. She stared into the fire, her face bathed in the soft glow, but her eyes were distant, lost in thoughts he couldn't reach. "Kala," Elias said, gently breaking the silence. His voice was rough, like it always was now, worn down by years of hardship. "Don't cry, little one." Kala didn't look up immediately. She never did when he spoke like that. She had heard the words many times before, words that were meant to soothe her but never did. It wasn't just the pain of losing her mother that weighed on her. It was the heaviness of the world around them, a world that had been broken and scarred beyond repair. Slowly she looked up, and Elias's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes were wide, innocent, but there was something else in them, something that seemed too old for a child of her age. He had seen those eyes before in the face of his late wife. Sarah's eyes. They were the same shade of green, the same spark of understanding. "Daddy, I miss Mommy," Kala whispered, her voice small and trembling. She didn't cry, not yet, but Elias knew the tears were close. She had cried so much in the past months that there were times when her little body seemed too tired to weep anymore. Elias felt the weight of her words settle heavily on his chest. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, the way Sarah had done countless times before the war. "I miss her too, Kala, but she's still with us. You have her in you, in your heart. She'll never truly be gone." Kala's eyes searched his face as though trying to understand the comfort he was offering. She was a smart girl, far too smart for her age. But there was one thing she hadn't yet grasped, something that Elias had tried to protect her from for as long as he could. The war wasn't over. The Kirith were still out there, and they weren't finished with humanity yet. Elias stood up, his knees creaking from years of wear. "It's getting late, Kala. We need to sleep. Tomorrow we'll gather some supplies and check on the old station. We can't stay here forever." Kala nodded without protest. She had grown used to the constant movement, the hiding, the uncertainty. She had learned how to survive just as Elias had. But no matter how many times they moved, no matter how many times they tried to find a safe place, the Kirith were always one step behind. Their ships patrolled the skies, their soldiers scoured the planet. It was only a matter of time before they found the small hidden pockets of humanity that remained. Later that night, as they lay huddled together in a small makeshift shelter, Elias stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Kirith had been silent for a while now, but it was the kind of silence that made his skin crawl. They were planning something, and whatever it was coming soon. But even in the face of danger, Elias couldn't bring himself to tell Kala the full truth. She was just a child, and he had promised her that she wouldn't have to carry the weight of the world on her small shoulders. But he knew that sooner or later she would have to. He closed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts aside, but his mind wouldn't rest. In the dark, he could hear Kala's soft breathing as she drifted off to sleep, her tiny body curled into his side for comfort. Her warmth was the only thing keeping him grounded. the only thing that made the loneliness bearable. As the night stretched on, Elias lay awake thinking of Sarah, thinking of the world they had lost. He had failed her. He had failed humanity. The war had taken everything from him, his wife, his home, his people, and now it was taking his hope. But as he looked down at Calla, her small hand clutching his shirt, something deep inside him stirred. She was the last of their kind, the last chance for humanity's survival, and no matter what, he would protect her. He would never let the Kirith take her from him, not like they had taken Sarah. The next morning, Elias and Calla packed their few belongings, gathering food and supplies before setting out on another dangerous journey. They moved quickly, quietly through the thick forest, avoiding any signs of the Kirith's patrols. Elias kept a sharp eye on the skies, his heart racing every time a shadow passed overhead. It wasn't long before they reached the remains of the old human resistance station. It had been abandoned for years, but Elias hoped they could find something useful, anything that could help them in their fight. They moved cautiously through the ruins, their footsteps muffled by the overgrown plants and fallen debris. Inside, the place was eerily silent. The walls were covered in dust and the faint scent of decay lingered in the air. But as they searched, Elias's heart skipped a beat when he found something unexpected. A small metal box, half buried under a pile of rubble. He pried it open, revealing an old, rusted device that looked almost like a weapon, but with intricate symbols engraved on its surface. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was important. He tucked the device into his bag, his mind already racing with possibilities. Whatever this was, it was a clue to something bigger, something that could change the course of the war. "Calla, we need to go," he said, his voice tense. He could feel the air around them growing heavier, the silence growing more oppressive. Something wasn't right. As they turned to leave, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. And in that moment he knew that whatever hope they had left, it was quickly running out. But as long as he had Calla by his side, he would never give up. Not now, not ever. The days that followed were filled with the same cautious routine. Elias and Calla moved from one hidden shelter to another, always on the move. The Kirith were relentless in their search for the last remnants of humanity, and Elias knew that if they stayed in one place too long, they would be found. The device he had found at the old resistance station weighed heavily on his mind. He wasn't sure what it was, but it felt important. It hummed faintly when he touched it, almost as if it were alive. It had been buried under layers of rubble, as if waiting for someone to find it, and now it had found its way into his hands. Elias could feel the weight of its potential, but he had no idea what to do with it. For the next few days, Elias kept the device close. He studied it as best he could, trying to understand its purpose, but the strange symbols etched into the metal meant nothing to him. The device seemed to respond only when Calla was near. Sometimes when she would touch it, a faint glow would pulse from within it, and Elias would feel a strange warmth spread through his chest. It was as if the device recognized her, or perhaps something more. One night, as they sat by a fire in the safety of a secluded cave, Elias could no longer ignore the strange connection between Calla and the device. She had been holding it for hours, her tiny fingers tracing the symbols, when something unusual happened. The glow from the device grew brighter, and the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. Calla looked up at Elias, her face filled with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. "Daddy," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "what is this?" Elias took a deep breath. He hadn't wanted to burden her with the truth, but it seemed that Calla was the key to unlocking whatever secret the device held. "I don't know, little one," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I think you're the one who can figure it out." Calla's eyes widened, and she looked back down at the device. It pulsed once more, this time with a force that sent a shockwave through the cave. The ground beneath them trembled, and Elias quickly stood up, his hand instinctively going to the weapon he had strapped to his side. "Daddy, what's happening?" Calla asked, her voice filled with fear. "I don't know," Elias said, his heart racing. He could feel the ground shaking more violently now, and he knew they had to leave. But as he turned to grab Calla's hand, something unexpected happened. The device in her hand began to hum louder, and suddenly a blinding light enveloped the cave. For a moment, Elias couldn't see anything. The world around him was drowned in the light, and the air was thick with the energy of the device. He heard a faint, strange voice, familiar yet foreign. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years. "Elias, Calla." His heart skipped a beat. It was Sarah's voice. But how could it be? She was gone, lost to the war. His mind raced and he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the light faded and the shaking stopped. Elias blinked, his eyes adjusting to the sudden darkness of the cave. He looked down at Calla, who was still holding the device in her small hands. Her face was pale, her expression one of confusion and awe. "Daddy," she said again, her voice trembling. "What just happened?" Elias didn't know how to answer. He didn't understand what had just occurred, but he felt something had shifted, something deep inside of him. The device was more than just an artifact. It was a key to something larger, something beyond their understanding. He knelt down beside her and took the device from her hands. It was warm now, almost as if it had been activated. The symbols on it were no longer just markings, they were glowing faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. "I don't know, Calla," Elias said softly, his mind racing, "but I think you've just unlocked something." They didn't speak much after that. Elias knew they couldn't stay in the cave much longer. The Kireth would be on them soon. But as they packed up their things and prepared to move out, Elias felt a flicker of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. The device, whatever it was, had responded to Calla, and that meant something. As they moved through the dense forest, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced up at the sky, scanning for any signs of Kireth ships, but the sky was eerily quiet. It was as though the universe itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. That night they camped in the shadow of an old building, long abandoned by humanity but still standing strong. Elias had hoped they could get some rest, but his mind wouldn't allow it. He sat up for hours, staring into the dark, wondering about the device and what it meant for the future of humanity. In the early hours of the morning, Elias woke to the sound of a distant rumble. It wasn't the wind or the natural sounds of the planet, it was something else. His heart began to race as he stood up, his hand reaching for his weapon. "Calla," he whispered urgently. "Wake up, we have to move." Calla stirred beside him, her eyes fluttering open. "What's wrong, Daddy?" "We're not alone," Elias said, his voice low and tense. He grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. "Hurry." They moved quickly through the darkness, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The rumbling sound grew louder, and Elias knew that the Kireth were getting closer. But as they reached a narrow pass through the hills, something incredible happened. The device in Elias's pack began to glow once more, and he felt an energy surge through him. The air around them seemed to shift, and suddenly, the rumbling sound stopped. Elias turned, his eyes scanning the hills, and that's when he saw it. A massive Kireth warship hovered in the sky, its dark form casting a long shadow over the land. It was coming straight toward them, its weapons powered up and ready to fire. Elias's heart sank. They had been discovered. But then something unexpected happened. The device in his pack began to glow brighter than ever before, and a strange energy filled the air. The warship in the sky flickered, as though it were struggling to maintain its position. Elias didn't understand what was happening, but he didn't hesitate. He pulled Calla close and looked at the sky with determination. "It's time," he whispered. The device pulsed once more, and suddenly the warship began to malfunction. Sparks flew from its engines and it veered off course. It was as if some invisible force was pushing it away, keeping it from firing on them. The Kireth soldiers aboard the ship scrambled in confusion as their own systems failed. The warship jerked, and in a final, desperate attempt to regain control, it began to plummet toward the ground. Elias stood frozen for a moment, stunned by what he had just witnessed. The device had done something extraordinary. It had disabled the Kireth warship just like that. Calla looked up at him with wide eyes, her face filled with awe and fear. "Daddy, what was that?" Elias couldn't answer. He was still processing everything that had just happened. The device had done something incredible, but it wasn't over. The Kireth would be back, and they would be even more determined to wipe out humanity for good.